Hey guys, what's going on?
What's good? Happy happy recording day.
We are a little behind, but we have an
That's what
amazing
happens.
guest today. We are a little behind because it's summer, but that's okay. We have we're back and we're here and we've got some cool things that we're going to be covering, and I think we had one of the most fun podcasts today.
She's a power hitter for sure. We had a great conversation. Amanda Christovich from Front Office Sports. If you'd followed her writing over the last 3 years, probably more well informed than probably 90% of the people on any of the college sports topics. She is a fascinating person. LA native, lives in New York City now. She's a graduate of Georgetown. She graduated from Columbia School of Journalism. I mean, you talk about a power player in the space. She is sharp.
Sean, what
Yeah,
was
just
your
extremely well respected in the space. For she mentioned she started during COVID, just as we were going into COVID, and then obviously into NIL, and really some awesome perspective on the recent stuff with EA Sports Gaming, as well as gender equity in the NIL space, some of the misconceptions that are going on in NIL, and a lot of really cool info just about NIL in general.
Adam? What was your favorite part?
Man, if you're listening for one thing in this episode, it's what if she was the commissioner of the NCAA, what her first 100 days would look like. That's crucial.
All right, let's get to the episode. Amanda, you've been a little busy the last couple of weeks.
A little.
Just a little bit?
Just a little. Just a little. It's been eerily quiet so far on this Monday, which always makes me
A little nervous.
uncomfortable. Yeah.
Amanda,
coming tomorrow.
You're one of our favorite follows on Twitter.
Oh my goodness.
So-
Thank you so much. That is high praise.
Because you have a candid way of covering NIL with your own kind of opinions, and they're fierce and bold and very spot on.
Oh,
So we'll get back into last week. Why don't you give us a little background on yourself?
Background on myself. Okay.
Yeah. Who is Amanda?
I grew up in Los Angeles. Now I live in New York City, which is probably why I've developed such bold and brash opinions. I went to Georgetown for undergrad, so I am a very suffering basketball fan these days, hoping things are going to turn around with the arrival of Ed Cooley. We'll see. And then I went to Columbia Journalism School, which is how I landed in New York. And I've been working for Front Office Sports since July of 2020, so coming up on 3 years. Have always been like an obsessive sports fan, but I really didn't get into college sports until I was in college. It was the right time, when I got this job at FOS. We were, gearing up for NIL, so I just kind of like dove in, and I don't think I have like not said the words NIL or athlete compensation any day, in the past 3 years since I've gotten this job. So it's been a really fun experience so far.
Did you ever expect that you would be covering something? NIL basically turned the industry on its head, right? Like, what an opportunity to come out of school, get a job at FOS. Like, what's the pace been like of covering a topic like college sports in the NIL era?
I think the best way to describe it is
don't say Wild Wild West.
You're not allowed to say wild.
I don't think it's the Wild West at all. I think it at all. Anyway, but another tangent. But
yes,
week 3, I think, on the job was the week that the Pac-12 and the Big Ten decided to shut down their football seasons. So I didn't know anyone because it was the middle of COVID, so I couldn't network in person, right? I literally was like scouring the internet for the email addresses of the Power 5 PR representatives, like being like, hey, like, my name's Amanda, I cover you now, can you please send me your press conference information, like, please. And like sitting on my couch, I lived in the financial district of Manhattan at the time. I had a roommate. I lived in a room with a fake wall. Like, it was, and I'm just like getting on the press conference with Kevin Warren and just like trying to learn, like catching up.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I think that is the pace has not really slowed since then.
looking back and like how everything, but particularly like media and the pivot to these like virtual press release, it all just feels like a fever dream of like there was some like side show that was happening in all of our realities.
Yeah.
And
I dream about work way too much. So
yeah.
I don't even know what's real and what isn't sometimes.
Oh, 100%. I love it.
Amanda, you obviously cover NIL. Seems like it's like almost exclusively. Did they really let you lean into that? Was that your want and wish? Like, tell us about how that evolved, because I think there's something special there.
So I have been interested in like the way that social media in particular can be a revenue driver for young athletes since like before the NIL era. Like I remember talking to my boss when I was an intern in the Georgetown athletic department in like 2018, 2019 about there was no NIL at the time, but he was like, we need to grow these kids' social media following because it's going to be good for them, et cetera, et cetera. So I've always been interested in that. And so when I got to front office sports, I said, hey, like this is going to be one of the top business stories just in all of sports because it's a completely new industry, and how often does that come around? And there are so many angles that you could take, from the political perspective of all the bills and congressional hearings, things like that, to gender equity. I wrote like probably like 15 articles before July 1st of 2021 even came around about how female athletes were going to be making more than anybody thought they would. And to this day, I still get people surprised about that, which is annoying. But yeah, I mean, they gave me a lot of latitude. They encouraged me to hit it at every angle. In the beginning of the job, it was like COVID and the rise of NIL, and then it kind of shifted to like NIL and then like gender equity in basketball and then the Alston case. And now it's like NIL, all the other athlete compensation cases, obviously EA college football. I'm never going to let go of gender equity. I'm going to be screaming about it from the rooftops until the day I die. But yeah, that's kind of the evolution of the beat.
It's funny what you mentioned when you speak about your forecast of female athletes in the space. We were at a convention down at NACTA in Orlando, and there was an administrator who was talking about how do we get what can we show athletes? How can we get them more involved on social? And I spoke up and I said, guys, have your male athletes look at what your female athletes are doing on social, because we've seen it from a merchandise standpoint. The female athletes are crushing them. And we're fortunate to have Angel Reese and Flage from LSU on our in our database, and the way that they've harnessed NIL and building beyond just what they are as basketball players, but as entire brands, has been incredible to witness.
Yeah. And I was just going to say, like, I spoke to like a professor shortly before NIL started who talked about like, I guess like the sociological reason behind that is like female athletes have always had to market themselves and tell their own stories because no one ever paid attention to them. So they literally like showed up, this generation in particular that has social media literacy showed up already knowing how to market themselves, how to story tell, just because they've never had the choice not to. So it was like they were kind of ahead in that, like learning how to build your brand, as opposed to the men's basketball and football players. And even I would say to the extent like a lot of baseball and like hockey players, like on the men's side, never really had to explain to anybody why they should pay attention to them. So they don't know how.
One of your articles that came out at the beginning of the month is, I actually have it bookmarked. It's one of my favorite reads. It's you love the Women's College World Series. You just might not know it yet. And,
Yes.
that's a big part of just kind of being able to activate and understand what the whole ecosystem looks like, right? When you can actually dive into some of these sports and the communities and the way that the fan base is so rabid, and then the actual on field or on court product is really exciting and compelling. And then you marry that with athletes who understand the fan engagement from a personal brand side. It's so riveting, and you see that kind of bear itself out on the NIL landscape with Virginia Tech softball, Oklahoma this year. You watch for Florida State, or pretty much anybody across the ACC. It is an awesome thing to just take in as a fan.
And just to
I mean,
say about like the softball thing, like I personally grew up playing baseball with boys. I never wanted to play softball. I tried to play baseball in high school and they wouldn't let me even like try out, even though all the guys on my little league team ended up on the team. We didn't have a very good or high school baseball team. But like, so like I always look back and think that if softball was treated the way that it is now, when I was a kid, I would have been way more interested in playing. I had really no understanding. Honestly, like I was one of those people that was like, I don't get softball. Like, why can't we just play baseball? And to an extent, like I'll always have like a sort of soft spot for like women in baseball and stuff. But like I myself, it's not, I'm not like a cheerleader for softball. Like I was convinced, by the way that it was marketed, put on TV, the ratings, the quality on the field. Like, yeah. So just wanted to put that out there. It wasn't an unbiased opinion. You know what I mean?
like an effect that we don't think about. Maybe like when everyone hears NIL, it's like, oh, athletes making money, but there's really a part where it's creating more visibility for hometown heroes and
Mhm.
connecting more athletes to youth sports, right? Because like if a fourth grader in softball gets, a Virginia Tech softball jersey with someone's name they might not know, that kid is like, oh my God, I have a Virginia Tech softball jersey, and they're going to wear it to school all the time.
Yeah.
And I think of like the random jerseys my mom got me from TJ Maxx. Like I adored those, right? And there's a part of NIL. I think I saw it on like it was a picture. It's like instead of I don't want to be like, it was like I want to be like Steph Curry, and it had like crossed out. It was like I want to be like Grace Berger or something. I don't know exactly who it was. But that is an effect of NIL that I think a lot of people overlook. I guess you've obviously reported on every single part of this industry. What has been your least favorite part to cover about NIL? We can talk about favorites, but like what has been the part or what has been the most frustrating thing for you?
Having to fact check all of the like fear mongering that the NCAA and like athletic department officials have thrown out about NIL, about how, before it started, about how there were concerns that it was going to like, you know, cause athletic departments to lose money because they would be competing with their athletes for sponsorship dollars, that it was only going to benefit the top players, that it was going to turn into pay for play. And it's like, oh, like it kind of did turn into pay for play. That's my second, like, like I guess my second least favorite thing to cover is like collectives and pay for play. Like I'm so sick of that narrative. Like, yeah, obviously, like collectives have to an extent turned into pay for play. And yet it's not like it hasn't changed who's at the top. It hasn't, like, you know what I mean? Like the transfer portal has changed who is at the top way more than NIL, in my opinion. So those are the things that frustrate me.
Yeah, and
Go
go ahead,
ahead.
Stephen.
No, I was gonna say like you talked about like legacy industry myths or legacy license holders or legacy veterans. How much of your time is spent convincing them versus attracting new and educating a new audience to NIL? Like do you feel like do you feel like your job is more convincing the old or really educating and empowering like new followers of NIL?
I think I've been pleasantly surprised by folks who have been in the space for a long time who have like reached out to me and said, "Hey, like your reporting is sort of, I've learned new things, right?" Like that's always my goal, is to just, I want to learn something new and then I want my readers to learn something new. But honestly, like if I'm being really candid, again, with COVID, it was hard to network. A lot of the quote unquote old guard, they weren't picking up my phone calls. Like they didn't want to talk to me. So a lot of my earlier sources were people who had a bit of a more radical view, who felt like they were the more accessible ones, who thought deeply, who had maybe a more theoretical approach, a lot of lawyers, a lot of professors, folks from smaller athletic departments. And so I thought, some of the like who's who of the sort of outside advocacy world, some of the early NIL folks, like that was interesting to me. And so honestly, like, I'm not really sure like who my following is 100% comprised of now. Definitely leans like a little more progressive in the like athlete compensation space, and I think part of that is because of like who was picking up my phone calls when I started this job.
What do you think remains the biggest misconception for the general public when it comes to NIL?
The biggest misconception is that it's a bad thing.
Do you think
Yeah.
that's still a misconception? Is it still rampant? Like the NIL flat earthers still exist?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I talk to, I live in New York City. I talk to people, like at bars and restaurants. I meet friends of friends, like people who don't work in sports, people who don't work in NIL, just the average person who like watches college football with a beer on Saturday at the bar and maybe doesn't think much about it. They're like, oh yeah, that NIL, players are getting paid. And then like people who are, or at least appear like relatively liberal, like politically or whatever, frankly, will say things like, yeah, like I don't think they should get paid. I was talking to somebody the other day who was like, I don't think the kids should get paid more than $500 for being in the EA college football game. And I'm like, do you even know like what you're saying? You know what I mean? Like it's
Yeah.
really interesting how ingrained the concept of amateurism is, even with the most sort of like casual college football fans and college basketball fans.
I'm framing my question here because there's a lot that's been going on. Obviously, we saw a pretty big contingent that went to Washington and was advocating to Congress for some things, right? And while that's happening, we see SAC, which is Student Athlete Advisory Committee, supposedly write a letter, kind of taking the same. Sorry, was that too much? Taking seemingly the exact same approach that the NCAA is taking, which when you look at the rest of the conversation, it doesn't really seem like those two things are aligned. You wrote a pretty good article. How much do you think that some of that conversation is feeding this like, oh, it's a bad thing because these athletes are saying that employment is a bad thing? Like, just maybe talk through some of what you touched on in that article.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing that I learned in reporting that article is that at least with the student athlete advisory committees, it's sort of self-selecting in terms of like the ideology of the athletes. Like it's like whoever is in SAC and then graduates, like they're the one who picks like the next person in SAC, right? So obviously beliefs are going to be aligned. And then, these kids come in and the NCAA officials, the conference officials, or like the school officials who are helping facilitate these meetings are feeding them these pro NCAA opinions. And they're saying like, hey, we're here to protect you. We're here to, this is what's going to happen, right? If athletes are deemed employees, these are all the like, one of the lawyers in a federal case that I cover calls it the parade of horribles that will happen if you're like deemed an employee, right? And they have nobody to tell them that that's not true. So they believe that, right? And that's so as far as that SAC letter went, I wouldn't be surprised if like the Division I SAC does actually believe the general idea that athletes shouldn't be employees, right? Like there was a current athlete who spoke in Washington a couple weeks ago at the conference that Arizona State put on. She was like, I don't want us to be employees because I think that being an athlete and a student is like a good thing, and like having those two things is together, I wouldn't want to separate them. And in my head I was like, well, don't you have friends who like have work study? Like just because you have a job while you're in college doesn't mean you're no longer a student. And then she was talking about like, yeah, it would be like very time consuming. And I'm like, I'm sorry, is your sport not already time consuming? Are you not already going over like the NCAA rule? You know what I mean? So I just feel like I think there's a gamut of what athletes think, right? Even like within the Power Five. But the short answer is I think a lot of them are more liberal than like that SAC letter suggested.
Yeah. So like there's a lot of times you talk about like market value, right? Or below market value. You wrote an article about our competition who won't be named and how much they pay athletes for jerseys. But then you're also covering, which caused a lot of problems because we were just paying them what we thought was what other college students can make when they sell to their fraternities and sororities. So we're like, sweet. and it's been a really eye-opening experience. Let me put it that way. And you're obviously covering the EA Sports, thing. What do you think market value is for a college athlete? How do you think about that, right? Like, is there a line you draw? Is there an amount? Is it a time thing? Like, what do you think market value looks like?
Well, I think it's less about the dollar amount and more about the structure of the deal is what I feel like my reporting has suggested. So my understanding of the jersey sale conundrum was that the percentage that the athletes were being offered of the full price of the jersey was a much smaller percentage than they would have been offered in a lot of other deals that currently exist in the college sports landscape, but also in the pros. Similarly, for EA Sports College Football, EA told The Athletic, they didn't tell me this, that they hadn't specified the dollar amount yet. The reported number is $500 per athlete, right? And then no royalties. The $500 per athlete is what everyone's focusing on. EA has not disputed that they're not going to be offering royalties. And that's where the below fair market value comes from, because it's industry standard in any video game that you're offering royalties to people who are represented in the game. And that's where the money is, right? So if you're never, this game could be sold for the next 10 years, right? Theoretically, there would be annual editions, so maybe the older versions would become less popular. But you get checks, right? If you're on a royalties, you get checks for presumably the rest of your life, right?
And I think what's interesting is EA, how do we do this at scale, right? The NFL is very much like this many teams, this many athletes. It's very boxed. You get into college sports and it's like, oh, this is a lot more than what we're used to. How the heck? And I think they default to, because it's hard, we just won't do it, right? And that's, I think, where it comes down to, now there's a one team versus TBG lawsuit going on, right? And there's a lot of irony behind that. So it's like everyone, and it's funny because everyone's arguing over putting their hands out, but they keep forgetting about the athlete. Like, what about them, right?
Absolutely.
What do you think will happen to the EA Sports, both the lawsuit side and what athletes are making? Do you think this just means that Sean can't play this video game for 5 more years?
Well, I may have a development. I need to check with my lawyers, my sources who are lawyers, on, what their interpretation of some of the more recent, lawsuit documents are. EA claims they're all good to go for next summer. I don't think I believe that.
Of course they would.
I don't think I believe that. But I think to me, what it's going to depend on is how many athletes choose to opt into the deal when it is presented to them. And I'm really looking forward to if when they do get offered the deal and it's public, right? Everyone's going to know for sure exactly what they're going to be offered. If that's a better deal than what's being reported now, and EA turns around and says, see, this is what we were doing all along. Okay, you know what? We'll let it go, maybe. I'm curious to see if this public pressure pushes them to offer a better deal than the reports are suggesting, A. And B, I'm curious to see if enough athletes decide that they'd rather hold out. Because, look, I get it. Would you rather have $500 or zero? I'd rather have 500, right? So how many of them are even aware that they could be making more if they hold out? It's very difficult to organize college football players to make a collective choice. So, if EA gets
it's hard enough to get them to practice.
Right. It's like if EA gets 50% or 60% of them to opt in to use their NIL, who cares about the other 40%? They'll just use generic avatars.
Right. It's interesting that that this conversation and this type of, kind of strategic or philosophical battle is happening at the college level, because a lot of it maps up, nothing is new under the sun, right? It's all just remixes. A lot of this maps up to what happened with Live in PGA, right? Oh, hold out. no, we're going to go and, move to live and get paid. Oh, we'll never do that. And then all of a sudden, what was it? A year down the line, all of a sudden, everybody that, trusted one side ends up not kind of 100% screwed. How much of like that kind of example or what's happening at the pro level do you think is really informing some of these college athletes? How much are they paying attention to like, oh, they really don't, give two whats about what happens to me at the end of the day?
It's really hard to say because even the ones who do have an opinion and are coming to that conclusion, they're not gonna say it. They are like, losing your scholarship is losing everything. So they don't want to speak out. The few that do, they may be some of the bigger players, like bigger names, they may not be. It's like, I don't even know. Again, my concern is like, I don't even know how many of them are saying to themselves, oh, like maybe there is a better, there are certain news or deal than this $500 offer, right? I don't know who they read, like what news they read, but I think that outlets where if they are reading those news outlets, they're thinking, oh yeah, sounds good. And if they're reading others, they're like, ooh, maybe these people. Well, if they're reading my article, they're
I was
probably
about to say,
thinking,
hopefully they're reading Amanda.
yeah, like they're probably thinking like, who are all these people who are like claiming to represent our interests and advocate on our behalf, and I've never heard of them, and I have no idea who they are. They've never reached out to me. Theoretically, I could opt in for them to work for me at my school, but like, shouldn't I also have an agent? Shouldn't, you know what I mean? So I'd like to think they're wondering to themselves, like, this is why unions exist. Like, this is like a business world problem. This is not just like a college sports problem. It's like, no one's going to advocate for your interests other than you. Period. Full stop. That's just life. So I'm hoping that more of them are going to start to realize that.
It's going to be interesting, kind of, if it's campus to campus. Like if one
Yeah.
school, all of their athletes don't opt in, and it's like, interesting. I wonder what classroom they were in when someone came and told them, and they all looked around and goes, "You signing that?" Nah. Or you're in another classroom and that's the whole part of this whole like opting in. I found it really interesting last year. I got a text from an athlete who were doing, all of their stuff, and he sends me a picture of a shirt I've never seen it before. He goes, "What the hell is this? Who's selling my stuff?" And I was like, "I'm sorry, man, you opted into your GLA."
Right.
He's like, how do I get out of that? I'm like, go talk to your, whatever. But like, you just don't know what they're being told behind closed doors. And it's their first day of practice. And it's like, hey, everyone, we need to sign this stuff. Go for it. Like,
and you're going to make some money. You don't have to do anything.
Yeah, you're going to make money. And it's like, wait, I'm making $32.60 every quarter.
Mm-hmm. Well, right. And then, this wasn't something that I reported. I forget who did, but there's this question of like the avatars, they are not going to have any control over what their avatar looks like. That would be a problem for me. I've had avatars made of me and I'm like, nope. You know what I mean?
Absolutely not. Yeah.
In the pros, do they?
Like they're signing away their rights and they don't even know.
Yeah.
And that's the whole part of like name, image, and likeness is like, it's your name, image, and likeness. Oh, I'm going to sign this sheet and you can do whatever you want with me.
Was having a really interesting conversation with an athletic director just probably 2 weeks ago. And I think there's a conversation where people say, well, you're getting paid for it. Don't worry about it. But the flip side that people, I don't think, understand is this conversation was around a gymnast and goes in and sees stuff for sale. And it was a picture that somebody had taken of her doing a particular movement. And what somebody may not recognize is that she was doing it wrong. It was some photo that was taken in an event, and it was not the right movement. And she got marked down. It was a terrible score, a low moment for her in her career. And because she opted into this thing, somebody got a hold of that photo, turned it into merchandise, and now it's on apparel and out there for the whole world to see. And that's the thing that people don't understand is like, it's not just oh, your face is up for sale. It's your identity, it's your craft, it's who you are. And if it's not being represented in a genuine way that you can have some control over, it goes so much deeper than just getting paid.
And that's why it's so critical for us, right, guys? That we have athlete buy-in on every piece of merchandise we put out. One, they're going to love what we're putting out, but two, they're going to be bought in when they're marketing it as well. And it's so critically important. I want to ask you, Amanda, we were down at NACTA. I know we have about 5 more minutes left with you and appreciate your time. Charlie Baker spoke down there, NCAA president, and he mentioned he had been to all these different schools, all these different conferences, and he kind of like out the side of his mouth, he mentioned he hadn't spoken to a single athlete who was in favor of being an employee. What do you make of that comment? And I find it hard to believe that not one athlete would be interested in that, but I don't know. What do you make of that?
It's really easy to lie, especially if you're a politician. That's not like my opinion. That's like the opinion of all journalists, right? Like when you go to journalism school, they you know what they say to you? They're like, if your mother says she loves you, find another source. Check it out. Like, you know what I mean? It's like, oh yeah, like I could say that, like, you know, my grandma is like the Queen of England. Like, you know what I mean? I just like don't, that doesn't mean anything to me what he's saying, because there is I literally know athletes on Twitter who like don't believe that. So even if he's telling the truth, it's like, well, what athletes are being trotted out to meet NCAA president Charlie Baker? We want the athletes who are not going to, you see what I'm saying? So even if that's the case, the schools might be self-selecting the athletes, right? And also, what is he just going to basketball practice and saying, hey, who wants to be an employee of their university? And they're all like, we don't know. Like, what are you talking about? Like, I just need to go to the dining hall and get like chicken fingers. You know what I mean? Like, that's what I would have been doing. So I think, and then the other thing is maybe he says, well, so there are 6 terrible things that are going to happen to you if you're an employee. Do you want that? It's like he could have framed the question that way too. But to me,
I think it's one of those. Yeah, I think it's really a question is like, does the NCAA want what's best for the athletes, or do they want what's easiest to still exist, right? Like, are they educators? Are they do they truly want what is best for an 18 to 22-year-old?
Yeah. And go ahead.
No. And it's like, go ahead. I want you to answer. And then I got one more for you. Go for it.
Yeah. I mean, I think that it's hard because we talk about the NCAA as like this big entity, right? This like nameless, faceless, like, you know, boogeyman. There are so many people who work in that office who like really do care so deeply about the athletes. Yep. And also people who are trying to clean up a mess that they didn't make, particularly like on the gender equity side. Like all the women's basketball folks had to answer for inequities that came out of issues they didn't create. And that, like, you know, so I try, like, you got to have empathy for that. But I think by and large on the business side of the NCAA, there's like a crisis, an identity crisis, because they all got into this because they wanted to work in sports and they wanted to be educators, but man, the checks are nice. So it's like, you know, I think it's hard to, you know, because like the NCAA's legal opinions may not be the opinions of like the people who go into that office every day, but that's what is going to keep them from being able to sustain that business model. You see what I'm saying? So it's kind of hard to answer that question.
Yeah. Okay. If you were the commissioner of the NCAA, how would you change NIL? Like, what would be your first 3 or 4 things you would do? Because I don't.
Nobody asked.
I don't. No. But like, I don't know if there's another individual that has covered every angle of NIL. Like, put a top 15 people in the world that has covered it since day one, inside out, legal, athlete side, perspectives. You've seen it all. I think that's why it's interesting, right? Like, I'd probably have like Mitt Winter as like number 2.
And it's one
But
of my best like expert sources. Like I've
He's
learned.
awesome.
yeah, he's like our favorite internet friend. I love Mitt. Like I just want to like give him a Mitt.
Mitt is
you
like
had
one
nice-
of everyone's. Yeah, those
Yeah,
I
yeah,
love
great.
talking to lawyers and professors. They're like my favorite people in the industry to talk
Yeah.
to.
So what would be your first 3 or 4 things, like your first 100 days in office? What are the first couple of things that you would do?
But like I wouldn't do it, I'm not even sure NIL would be the one of those top 3 things, honestly.
Okay.
I think thing number 1 is accepting the fact that is like get these lawsuits dismissed, like accepting the fact that like college athletes should probably be employees. So let's just figure out how that's going to work. Let's work with the schools, let's work with the advocates, the courts. Let's figure out where we're drawing the line there. Let's make it work cuz it's going to happen, right? That's thing number 1. Thing number 2 is we need to completely revamp and make sure that like all the revenue streams are going to allow for gender equity because they don't currently. Thing number 3 is health and safety. We need to completely overhaul the way that healthcare is considered in the NCAA. I understand there are liability issues. They don't want to be liable for concussions, whatever. But it's like the NCAA is behind the NFL and how they treat concussions. Okay, like, and the NFL isn't exactly like a beacon of hope in that department. So, and then yeah, as far as NIL goes, like, the thing that I'm concerned about is athletes getting taken advantage of. I don't really care about competitive equity. I don't care, because Alabama's going to Alabama. Like, it doesn't matter. You know what I mean? So I care about who are these agents? Are there deals that athletes aren't getting? Like what are the structures that we can put in place, like an agent registry, that sort of thing, that are going to protect the 18 to 22-year-olds and not competitive equity and like the business model and, making it life easier for the coaches. You know what I mean? Those are my things.
Man,
I love it.
You talk about being able to ask a question to the right person. That is it. And I'm smiling not because of how poor the NCAA's concussion protocol is, but I just love the context of look, if you're willing to go to Congress and fight battles to stop athletes from getting paid, the perspective of you should go and fight for health and safety. You should go and fight for gender equity as well. I love that.
Why is there no national health and safety requirement? That's something that the Transformation Committee worked on in Division 1. And, they're making incremental improvements. I don't understand what the point of the NCAA is if it's not to keep players safe.
You can't argue with that at all.
You might be there one day, Amanda.
Yeah.
You might be up there.
You got
Absolutely not. You know what? It's so much easier to sit in my room in New York and tell you what I think they should do. Like, it's not like their jobs are easy. Okay. Also,
Yes.
like, I'm not a politician. I'm a journalist.
Well,
But then there's gonna be a young Amanda graduating from journalism school.
Yes.
Hitting you up. All right, Adam, what do you got?
I love it. We got our final question. We love to ask our guests, Amanda. This is the NIL show, and so we got to ask you, what is your go-to NIL restaurant deal? Who are you signing an NIL restaurant deal with today?
Like, if I'm the player.
Oh yeah.
Oh, I am, man, this is such a basic. Okay, I'll give you a couple. The first one is I am the queen of 2 a.m. McDonald's. So like, I know, Mickey D's is the big corporate whatever, but like, man, I love my double quarter pounders. And I have like a million selfies of just like me and the cheeseburger at 2:00 in the morning.
QPC, love it.
And then the other thing is there is this Italian restaurant. Well, maybe I wouldn't want to do an NIL deal with them because I wouldn't want other people to know about them. I don't know, but there's an Italian restaurant near my apartment that I can only go with my parents because of the price point, but it is the most fabulous Italian food I've ever had, not in Italy. And so I would literally like lay down in front of the street for the people who cook for me there.
I love it. The dichotomy
That's
of
awesome.
Amanda, the 2 a.m. McDonald's and the top end Italian, New York Italian. I love it. Well, those restaurants, you know where to find her. Amanda Christovich, FOS.
Yes.
Send her the deal. She's going to push it out. What a great conversation, man. We're so grateful for your time. Like we mentioned, we love following you and your journey and your writing and your opinions.
Oh,
So
thank
keep
you
up the
so
good
much.
work. We've loved this conversation. We'll be sure to keep watching you closely. You have to come back and give us an update on some of
We
these
need to make
developments
this
here in the future.
every 6 months. Just we just want to hear like you riff. It is really cool to hear you just riff on this because
Oh, thank
you're
you. My
seeing
friends
it.
at dinner on Friday nights don't necessarily agree. They're
Yeah.
like,
Same
Yeah,
with
I
our
felt that.
same with our wives.
Yeah, it
I
was.
felt that. Yeah.
That's why we're all friends, and Sean's my neighbor and Adam was in my wedding, and they don't want us to talk about it, so that's why we're here.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. Amanda Christovich from Front Office Sports. Appreciate the time. I'm Adam. That's Sean and Steven. That means this is another episode of the NIL Show. Thanks, y'all.